1 in 3 Nigerian women have experienced physical or sexual violence. 55% of these women have never sought help or reported to anyone. We must take action to end this. If you are a victim or know someone who is being harassed, violated, or intimidated and threatened into silence, please call our helplines. This message is brought to you by the National Human Rights Commission in collaboration with Abuja Discourse and the Ndi Foundation, with support from the Open Society Initiative for West Africa.
Human rights violations. Are you a victim or are you a witness? Please call our helplines. This message is brought to you by the National Human Rights Commission in collaboration with Abuja Discourse and the Ndi Foundation. Many hashtags flood social media daily and they get immediate response from many Nigerians and organizations alike. But sometimes, are these social media responses effective enough? What are the new ways people are fighting for their fundamental human rights? Are they effective? On Rubbin'Minds, we spotlight the peculiarities of today's human rights movements for true democracy. How has social media helped to amplify the voices of many Nigerians? How much more can we do, and what are some of the important human rights fights we need to focus on? Ndi Kato and Hundeyin joins Ebuka to answer these questions next on Rubbin'Minds.
All right, welcome back. We're still talking human rights on the show today, and I'm being joined now here by Hundeyin, who's a journalist. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, we're joined by Ndi Kato in Abuja. But first, let me start with you, David. There's a new sort of wave of protests in Nigeria, which I was talking about with the last couple of guests, which technology sort of drives now, which is sort of the hashtag protests. We did see a lot of that recently with the incidents of rape. Yeah. Which sort of swept across the country the last couple of weeks. Justice for Uwa, justice for Tina, justice for Jennifer. There were so many of this hashtag. But there's another side to the belief that does it actually work? Are we doing the right thing with the way we're going about speaking up these days?
So I think yes and no. It works, but it works only to an extent. So those who say, oh, it's just social media, I don't think they really know what they're talking about. Social media is actually really powerful. And I think there have been quite a number of instances where the fact that something went viral or was pushed on social media resulted in some kind of action to resolve that thing. However, in the case of directed political change or cultural change, it always has to go beyond social media. I like to point out, for example, that some of the most successful sort of groups in the world, whether it's political groups or religious groups, they always have this habit in common that regardless of how much online engagement they do, there's always a face-to-face element. So, for example, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and I think their most popular thing that they're known for is going from door to door and knocking. In this age, they don't need to do that, but they still do that. Political formations around the world, people still go from door to door with flyers because that face-to-face personal contact can't be replicated online. Yeah. However, I think in the case of Nigeria, where for a variety of reasons, that sort of direct face-to-face action, in many cases, sometimes is risky, sometimes it's just not desirable. So I think people do what they can. So ultimately, we will need to have that conversation about taking this thing offline. But I think for now, it's unfair to criticize those who are doing some sort of advocacy online.
Yeah. Do you think younger people are lazy? It almost feels like when the military was in power, we saw more activism on the streets in Nigeria. Democracy has come where there's supposed to be more free will. Getting people to come out and actually protest on anything, whether peacefully, seems harder these days. And a lot of people believe younger Nigerians are lazy or just want to sit down and type. Do you think that's the case?
It's not necessarily a thing about laziness, in my opinion. I think it's a thing about comfort. So in the Abacha years, for example, well, I don't know if people came out protesting in Abacha years, but in the Babangida years, maybe, when such things could still happen. I think there was the country was going through a very, very rough period. People were very uncomfortable in a manner that we perhaps can't even imagine right now. So I think that sort of galvanized people to go out onto the streets. I think these days, it might sound counterintuitive to say this, but I think these days we actually enjoy a measure of relative comfort compared to what Nigeria used to be at the time. And we also have a lot of distractions to keep us to keep our minds off of these things. So these factors combine to sort of keep us indoors because, who wants to go out when you can stay indoors and play your FIFA on PS5?
Put out a few tweets.
Exactly.
Let's go to Abuja now, and joined by human rights activist Ndi Kato. There's a lot of younger people, like I say, who believe that a lot of things hinder how we go about our activism these days. What are the challenges that you, as an individual, face in this new age of activism?
I'll pick up from some of the things that David has touched on, and is that we get distracted very easily. So if you look at, for the past couple of weeks, we were talking about Uwa's case, and people would just move on. In the morning, you might be talking about brutality and all of those issues. And by evening, somebody has said, should my wife cook for my mother? Or should somebody sit in the front seat? And all of that distraction just takes all the attention away. There's also I don't know how to explain what the exact word to use for what is happening in the media now, but it kind of like desensitizes people from what is happening. So if you're talking about killings in Nigeria, things that should trigger Nigerians to want to pay attention, to want to act, it's reduced to numbers. And someone pointed it out, I think it's the writer, El Nathan, and it's like there's a deliberate way in which, news is being reported that just makes people not connect to what is happening. It's reported like gossip. 15 people died, so place, 15 people gone down. There's no backstory. There's no, history of this thing, nothing. So some of those things too take our minds away or reduce the intensity of things that could keep us out on the street or keep us talking. And I think another issue I face as an activist, you see, I think in Nigeria, everybody wants to be a hero. We're seeing those kind of things. So a movement comes up, end SGBV or state of emergency SGBV, and would expect that, everybody throw your weight behind state of emergency SGBV. But then again, because, this platform democratizes voices, so people think, let them go ahead and do their own this side. We would also do here, kind of like takes attention away or, divides movement into smaller units instead of a big unit. And I think either Dr. Samamadi or Dr. Joe Odumakin touched on the poverty issue. I think people have gotten to that level of poverty. People are tired and are existing on survival. Every day you wake up as a Nigerian, you just want to survive. You want to get to the next point. You want to get to the next day successfully. And some of these things, people can't really just stop to pay attention to them. Even as an activist, I find myself in such situations some days. Like you hear something and you're like, I just want to survive today. I just want to get through today. I just, again, and all the loopholes and all the pitfalls in trying to solve these issues and how difficult every step of the way can be in trying to solve these issues. So I think some of these things, they contribute to making these difficult for people. I know it looks like, our generation is not doing enough or we might be busy with other things. No, there's a certain level of oppression you would face and see nothing happening that, might push you to silence. And that is another thing. But what we thank God for, what we're thankful for, is that, again, the space has been democratized. Our voices can be heard. We are louder, we're bolder. And I'll use this example. My mom did a lot of writing on the injustice of Nigeria growing in her time. She did a lot of writing on this crisis and all of those issues. You could say that she was an activist. But I, as a young person, when I started activism, when I was speaking, because of the difference in brutality and, the generations, how bad they faced issues under the military, you would hear even my mom, who was a bold activist and a gender, warrior and all of that, would say, please just calm down, please just calm down. There's a difference between that. I think that we have been on the street so many times too. We've done so many protests that it looks like it's normal. I think that it wasn't as much in the last generation, but the few that happened stood out. For us, it could be just any other day.
So let me
thrice in a week. It could be how many times in a month. It could just happen.
Sorry to cut you in there, because you mentioned a few things that I want to touch on. You know, first of all, you mentioned the fact that the media maybe might play a role in the fact that, you know, people get desensitized to a lot of things. But on the other hand, which I mentioned with the earlier guests, you know, we've had so many cases of journalists, quote unquote, being hounded and disappearing. We don't know what's happening, but these things are happening, whether we like it or not. And there's a fear for a lot of people who say, okay, I can't do my job fully as a media person because I don't know what the consequences might be. On the other hand, you also mentioned poverty being an issue. So, and these two issues sort of are tied to, for a lot of people, government. How much of a role is government playing or should be playing in letting the space be freer for issues like this to thrive?
Well, in terms of talking of the role that government should play, I would say I think there should be another segment that will talk about the future. But let me just touch on this. What we are seeing in the past couple of months, especially with COVID-19, is everybody starting to pay attention. And it was for me at the beginning of this, I said, look, what is happening right now is a seismic shift. And it could go either way. It could be that we'll end up cementing autocracy, cementing brutality, or everybody will sit down and will sit up. Everyone will sit up and decide, look, I don't know what's happening. This is a certain level of uncertainty that we don't know what could happen. And we need to control things from further breaking down. And so in this particular setting, I've seen government stepping up. You could see the police. In the past couple of weeks, we've seen issues that, you know, we had to go to the police station to solve and everything. And you would see the police, some officers want to prove stubborn, but it's like there is an order from above, like, no, this can't happen at this time. This can't be this way. This cannot be that way. And what I would say is, can this be sustained, please?
Yeah.
Can this be sustained? Can we have the sustenance of key government organizations that are trying, or their mandate is actually to pursue human rights, to ensure human rights, sustain what is happening? We have NHRC stepping up to the plate. We have NAPTIP. We're hearing a lot of these organizations. I think even Malami came out with a statement for what they are supposed to do. And so we're seeing in real time government stepping up to what it is they are supposed to do. But for me, number one is that we need this to be sustained. We need this to be sustained.
Let me come to David here. Sorry.
Beyond this.
Sorry to cut you. I just want to come to David now because we have our time isn't that much. Something that's sort of gained traction in the last couple of years, started in America, has become a very popular phrase around the world now, is fake news. And a lot of young people are accused of fueling this. You know, you go on social media, something is trending, you realize it's a lie or something made up by somebody. And most people believe that a lot of this government trying to control the spaces because of things like this and what it might cause. What are your thoughts on, you know, this whole talk about regulating social media and what it might do for stifling voices and, you know, becoming a human rights issue, and also sort of constraining this platform you believe is a new way of protesting?
First of all, I want to point out that if we want to talk about fake news and distribution and dissemination of fake news, between those who do it on a social media level and those who do it in an official capacity in government, I think there's serious competition between them. This government is also guilty of putting out fake news. They do so regularly. So I think it's an excuse that is being put out because they're trying to stifle freedom of the public space to hold certain discussions. I think it was Dr. Joe who made the point earlier that the government doesn't necessarily want to do the right thing, but they're obsessed with being seen in a certain way. They're obsessed with looking good. And unfortunately, when people like us are having the conversations we do on social media in the very unfiltered, raw, earthy manner that we do, where we don't do the whole sass, I think everybody says things as they see it, the government really doesn't like that. So obviously, then the next thing is to look for an excuse. And that excuse is, you people are distributing fake news. But if fake news was really the problem, I don't think it's an unsolvable problem. And I don't think the only way to solve it will be to wield the ban hammer, which is, you know, their preferred implement. I think, for example, how on Twitter, for example, of recent, I think we've been seeing examples of how prominent people who disseminate fake news are being tackled. I think we saw the example of the US president, where Twitter actually put an addendum to his tweet that this tweet may contain misleading information. So I think there are several ways of dealing with these things than simply going after the people and, you know, trying to constrain the space, because at this point in Nigeria's history, I want to point out that the Global Press Freedom Index of 2020 has Nigeria at number 115 out of about 200 countries.
Yeah, so it's not looking good.
We are not doing well at all. And at the same time, we're trying to borrow legislation from countries like Singapore, which ranks at number 158 on the press freedom ranking, 43 places below us. So I think we can clearly see what direction the government is trying to head in. And fake news is obviously the easy scapegoat. So I think that needs to be really resisted frontally.
Ndi Kato, one sentence or one word, are you hopeful?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
For
are you
now.
hopeful, David?
I have to be.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us. I mean, it's a conversation that needs definitely more than 15, 20, 30 minutes, but we'll continue to talk about it and hopefully continue to hold government accountable for their actions.